In the shadow of the frontier's jagged mountains, Clara Henderson runs her father's inn alone. Known for her kindness but guarded heart, she lives by one rule: never trust a man who arrives after sundown. When a wounded stranger with haunted eyes stumbles in at dusk, something about him makes her cautious rule waver. By nightfall, she discovers he's no ordinary drifter, but a wanted cowboy with a price on his head. As the distant thunder of approaching horses grows closer, Clara faces him with desperate words. "Leave before nightfall. Please." His response is simple yet shattering. "If I ride out now, I'll never see you again." Will she choose safety or risk everything for a man the law has condemned but her heart cannot? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun painted Elkhorn in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the main street as Clara Henderson swept the porch of Henderson's Rest. Her father's silver pocket watch hung heavy in her apron pocket, its weight a constant reminder of responsibilities inherited too young. "Almost sundown," she murmured, checking the timepiece. 5:30, still time to finish her chores before the light faded completely. Elkhorn wasn't much, a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings, a general store, blacksmith, sheriff's office, and her father's inn at the edge of town. But it was home, had been for all of Clara's 28 years. Mrs. Abigail Porter, the town's eldest resident and closest thing Clara had to family now, called from across the street. "Evening, Clara. Expecting any guests tonight?" "Just the regulars for supper," Clara replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Mr. Johnson and the Carson brothers. Good, good." Mrs. Porter nodded, the feather in her hat bobbing. "Better that way. Sheriff rode out this morning, said there's been trouble in Silver Creek. Outlaws, they say." Clara's hand instinctively touched the watch. "Again? That's the third time this month." "These hills hide more than just deer and rabbits, my dear." Mrs. Porter's tone carried a warning. "Your father understood that better than most." Clara only nodded. She'd heard the whispers about her father, how Samuel Henderson had sometimes bent rules for those in need, how his kindness didn't always discriminate between the lawful and lawless. But that was before the night riders had come, before they'd found him on the road. The creak of leather and jingle of spurs announced Sheriff Wilson's approach before his voice did. "Ladies," he tipped his hat, dark eyes lingering on Clara. "Inn's looking well kept, Miss Henderson." "Sheriff," Clara acknowledged with a nod. "Thought you'd ridden to Silver Creek, returned early. Found what I needed to know." Wilson rubbed his mustache, a habit that preceded his attempts at courtship. "Might I join you for supper tonight?" Clara busied herself with her broom. "We serve at 6, Sheriff." "All are welcome who pay their way." Wilson's smile tightened. 3 years of such deflections hadn't deterred him yet. "I'll be by then." As he walked away, Mrs. Porter chuckled. "That man's more persistent than a summer drought." "And about as welcome," Clara muttered, then immediately felt unkind. Wilson was a decent man, just not one who stirred anything in her beyond polite tolerance. Inside, Clara lit the lamps and stoked the fire in the kitchen stove. Henderson's Rest wasn't grand. 10 rooms upstairs for travelers, a small dining room, and the quarters she'd shared with her father at the back. But it was clean, respectable, and known for Clara's cooking, which drew even those with no need of a bed, as she kneaded dough for the evening bread. Clara fell into the rhythm that had defined her days since her father's passing 3 years ago. Rise before dawn, clean the rooms, prepare breakfast for any guests, manage accounts, shop for supplies, prepare lunch, wash linens, prepare supper, serve the regulars, lock up as darkness fell. That last part was her own addition. Samuel Henderson had kept the inn open at all hours, ready to receive travelers whenever they arrived. Clara had changed that rule the day after they'd buried him. "No one after dark," she told the townsfolk. "The door locks at sundown." Some had grumbled, but they'd understood. A woman alone couldn't be too careful. The grandfather clock in the dining room, another of her father's treasures, chimed 6 just as the first supper guests arrived. Mr. Johnson, the elderly schoolteacher, followed by the Carson brothers. Farmers whose land bordered town. Clara served beef stew, fresh bread and apple pie with practiced efficiency, listening to the town gossip with half an ear. Sheriff Wilson arrived last, taking his usual seat near the kitchen door. "The gang that hit Silver Creek," Wilson announced, loud enough for all to hear. "They took 2 lives along with the bank's money." The room quieted. "Any idea which way they fled, Sheriff?" asked the elder Carson brother. Wilson's eyes met Clara's briefly. "North, into the hills." "Our hills," Clara thought, unconsciously touching her father's watch again. The timepiece had been his constant companion, a gift from her mother before consumption had taken her when Clara was just a girl. She'd often wondered if her father consulted it so frequently to remember her mother or simply from habit. As the dining room emptied and twilight deepened into true darkness, Clara began her nightly ritual. Check the back door, bolt it. Check the windows, latch them. Douse the lamps in the dining room. Lock the front door. Security, routine, solitude. The pocket watch read 9:30 as she finally retired to her quarters. Another day complete. Another night to pass alone with her memories and the creaking of an old inn that had once been filled with her father's laughter. She placed the watch on her bedside table, wondering, not for the first time, if Samuel Henderson would approve of the careful, constrained life his daughter now led. A life measured in cautious hours, marked by the steady tick of his silver watch. The next evening brought a sunset like Clara had never seen, ribbons of crimson and purple bleeding across the sky, bathing Elkhorn in an unearthly glow. She paused on the porch, dustcloth in hand, to admire nature's display. "Red sky at night," Mrs. Porter called from her usual evening constitutional. "Shepherd's delight," or a warning, Clara replied. Old-timers in these parts claimed a red sunset foretold change. As if summoned by her thought, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the fiery sky. Clara shielded her eyes, watching his approach. The man sat tall in his saddle, despite what appeared to be a slump of exhaustion in his shoulders. Instinctively, Clara checked the position of the sun, still above the mountains. Still time before her rule took effect. The horse was a fine one, a chestnut mare, tired but well-bred. The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback, though Clara noticed him wince slightly, favoring his left side. "Evening, ma'am?" His voice was low and smooth as creek water over stones. "You'd be Miss Henderson?" Clara nodded, keeping a proper distance. "Henderson's Rest, yes. We're open for another hour." Up close, she saw he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His face bore several days' growth of beard, and a purpling bruise spread along his jawline. What caught Clara most were his eyes, clear blue against sun-darkened skin, direct but not threatening in their assessment of her. "Just need a room for the night." He removed his hat, a quality Stetson, dusty but well-shaped. "If you've got one available. Name?" Clara asked, businesslike, as she prepared to lead him inside. A pause, brief but noticeable. "Ethan Cole." Inside, Clara registered him in the guest book, noting how his hand hovered over the page before signing, as if considering what to write. His saddlebag, which he kept close, was worn leather, patched in places, but of good craftsmanship. Not the bag of a drifter or common outlaw. "Supper's served at 6, she informed him. "Bath's 2 bits extra. We'd lock up at sundown, so if you're planning to go out, best be back before then." Ethan nodded, seeming to take her rules in stride. "Won't be going anywhere, Miss Henderson." "Been riding 3 days straight." Clara led him upstairs to the room, at the far end of the hall, the one furthest from her own quarters, a habit she'd developed with male guests. "Where you coming from, Mr. Cole?" she asked, not out of nosiness but caution. "South," he replied, then added, "Fort Laramie last." Clara paused at the doorway, not entering the room. "And your business in Elkhorn?" A faint smile touched his lips, softening the hard planes of his face. "Just passing through, ma'am." Nothing more. She didn't believe him, though she couldn't have said why. There was something in the way he carried himself, alert despite his evident fatigue, his eyes constantly noting exits, windows, the layout of the hall. "Well then," she said, "rooms 75 cents per night in advance." He reached into his pocket and produced a silver dollar. "For tonight and tomorrow, with the bath." As she took the coin, their fingers brushed. Clara withdrew her hand quickly, feeling strangely flustered. "I'll have hot water sent up." Downstairs, Clara found herself moving to the window, watching as Ethan Cole led his mare to the stable behind the inn. There was something in the gentle way he handled the animal, murmuring into its ear as he unsaddled it, that didn't match her mental image of a dangerous man. Later, as she prepared supper, Clara caught herself glancing more often than necessary at the dining room. Ethan sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, with a clear view of both the front door and kitchen entrance. He ate methodically, with the appreciation of a man long on the trail, but the manners of someone raised proper. Sheriff Wilson arrived at his usual time, pausing noticeably when he spotted the stranger. Clara watched their silent assessment of each other, the careful nod Ethan offered, the slightly narrowed eyes of Wilson in return. Men's rituals, Clara thought, setting down Wilson's usual plate with perhaps more force than necessary. "New guest?" Wilson asked quietly. "Just passing through," Clara echoed Ethan's words. "Mighty fine horse for a man just passing through," Wilson observed. After the sheriff left, Ethan remained at his table, nursing a cup of coffee as the other diners departed. When only the two of them remained in the dining room, Clara began clearing tables, aware of his eyes following her movements. "Miss Henderson," he finally said, "I'm obliged for the room. It's been a while since I've slept in a proper bed." Something in his tone made her pause. "Where do you normally sleep, Mr. Cole?" The smile again, but sadder this time. "Lately, under the stars, mostly." As she collected his empty plate, Clara noticed his saddlebag resting beside his chair rather than left in his room. A man who kept his possessions close. What secrets did that worn leather hold? What was Ethan Cole running from, or toward? In the kitchen, Clara's hands moved with practiced precision, chopping vegetables for tomorrow's stew. The weight of the kitchen knife in her palm was familiar, comforting, a tool she'd learned to wield with skill for cooking and, if necessary, protection. 3 years ago, shortly after her father's death, a drunk miner had cornered her in this very kitchen. She'd raised this same knife then, her hand trembling but her eyes fierce. The man had backed away, cursing. Since that night, the knife had become both companion and talisman. Clara glanced through the small window that connected the kitchen to the dining room. Ethan Cole still sat at his corner table, now reading a weathered book pulled from his saddlebag. His posture remained alert, despite his apparent concentration. The back door creaked open, announcing Mrs. Porter's arrival for her evening tea. "You've a new guest," the older woman observed, settling at the kitchen table. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Handsome, if a bit rough around the edges," Clara continued chopping. "Just passing through." Mrs. Porter accepted the cup of tea Clara poured. "That's what they all say. Your father used to tell me the same about certain guests." Clara's knife paused mid-slice. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Porter sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Samuel had a soft spot for those in difficult circumstances. Some might have been running from something or someone." She lowered her voice. "Your stranger has that look about him." "He's not my stranger," Clara replied too quickly. Mrs. Porter's knowing smile caused heat to rise in Clara's cheeks. "Be careful, dear. Men with secrets bring trouble, especially handsome ones." Through the window, Clara watched Ethan rise from his table and exit to the porch. She moved to the side window, knife still in hand, and observed him tending to his horse in the fading light. His movements were gentle, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he checked the mare's leg. Whispering into her ear, a memory surfaced, her father doing the same with their old plough horse, his tenderness with animals, revealing a character otherwise hidden beneath his gruff exterior. Clara had always believed you could judge a man by how he treated creatures dependent on him. I should finish preparing for tomorrow, Clara said. Turning back to her work, Mrs. Porter nodded, understanding the dismissal. At the door, she paused. Your father would have wanted you to live, Clara, not just exist. It's been 3 years. Alone again, Clara resumed her chopping with more force than necessary. Live, not just exist, easy for Mrs. Porter to say. The old woman hadn't found her father beaten and left for dead by road agents. Hadn't spent weeks nursing him only to lose him anyway. Hadn't promised him on his deathbed to keep the inn running, to be careful, to be safe. The knife slipped, nicking her finger. Damn, Clara muttered, sucking the small wound. The dining room bell rang, startling her. Ethan Cole stood at the service window. Pardon, Miss Henderson, he said, voice low. Wondered if I might trouble you for more coffee. Clara nodded, momentarily flustered by his proximity. As she poured the coffee, she noticed a long scar along the back of his hand. Old, but significant. You're hurt, he observed, noticing her bleeding finger. It's nothing. She handed him the cup. Careful not to let their fingers touch again. Occupational hazard. His eyes held hers a moment too long. Thank you. For the coffee and the room. Places like this. He paused, seeming to search for words. They're becoming rare. Something in his tone conveyed more than simple gratitude. Clara found herself wondering what roads this man had traveled. What had given him that bruise along his jaw, that scar on his hand, that wariness in his eyes. As the evening progressed, more regular diners arrived, Mr. Johnson, the Carson brothers, and 2 traveling salesmen who'd been staying at the inn for 3 days. Clara moved efficiently between tables, aware of Ethan's quiet presence in the corner, of his eyes occasionally following her movements. The knife remained close at hand as she worked, its wooden handle smooth against her palm. A sensible precaution, she told herself, not because of Ethan specifically, but because caution had become her nature. Yet something about the stranger made her both more alert and, paradoxically, less afraid than she should be. When the grandfather clock struck 8, Clara began her nightly routine of ushering out the last diners and closing up. Ethan rose without being asked, understanding the ritual. "Good night, Miss Henderson," he said, pausing at the dining room doorway. "I'll be up with sunrise. Don't trouble yourself about breakfast. Breakfast is included with the room," she replied automatically. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Clara's breath catch. "Then I look forward to it," he said simply, and climbed the stairs to his room. Clara stood motionless for a moment, the kitchen knife still in her hand, caught between caution and an unfamiliar stirring of curiosity. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. She moved to lock the doors, secure the windows, maintain the boundaries that kept her safe. Yet as she completed her nightly ritual, Clara couldn't help wondering what boundaries had already been crossed, simply by allowing herself to wonder about the man sleeping under her roof. Breakfast at Henderson's Rest passed without incident. Clara served her guests efficiently, noting how Ethan ate with the same quiet appreciation he'd shown at dinner. She caught herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands that handled her mother's delicate china with unexpected care. Midday brought an unusual flurry of activity to the inn. A stagecoach passing through stopped for lunch, filling the dining room with unfamiliar faces and loud conversation. Clara welcomed the distraction from her thoughts about her mysterious guest, who had spent the morning mending his saddle on the front porch. As the afternoon sun began its westward slide, Clara ascended to the storage room in the attic, rummaging through old trunks for extra linens. Her hand brushed against a familiar wooden box, her father's keepsakes. She hadn't opened it since his death. Something about Ethan Cole made her curious about her father's past in a way she hadn't been before. The box contained the expected: her mother's handkerchief, Samuel's pocket watch chain, old letters. But beneath these lay something unexpected, a yellowed wanted poster, folded and tucked beneath everything else. Clara unfolded it carefully, the brittle paper crackling between her fingers. The illustration was crude but effective. A bearded man with a scar across his left cheek. "Wanted Jacob Reeves," the poster declared. Murder, theft, assault. $500 reward, Clara frowned. Why would her father keep this? The date on the poster was 15 years old. She was about to refold it when she noticed her father's handwriting on the back. Innocent. Safe passage provided. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Mrs. Porter's words echoed in her mind. Samuel had a soft spot for those in difficult circumstances. The sound of horses outside pulled Clara from her thoughts. She tucked the poster into her pocket and hurried downstairs. Sheriff Wilson and 2 deputies were dismounting in front of the inn. Clara smoothed her apron and stepped onto the porch, noting how Ethan had moved to the shadowed corner, his posture casual but alert. "Sheriff," she greeted, "what brings you by so early? Supper won't be ready for hours yet." Wilson removed his hat, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "Official business, Miss Henderson? We're searching for a fugitive believed to be in the area." His eyes flickered briefly to Ethan. "Thought I'd check if you've had any strangers pass through." Clara's heart quickened. "Just the usual travelers. Mr. Cole here arrived yesterday." She gestured to Ethan, who nodded politely. "Cole, is it?" Wilson approached, studying Ethan with narrowed eyes. "Don't believe I've seen you in these parts before." "First time through," Ethan replied evenly. "On my way north. From?" "South." Ethan's tone remained respectful but offered no elaboration. Wilson circled, his experienced eyes taking in Ethan's worn boots, quality hat, the careful way he held himself. "What's your business up north?" "Looking for work. Heard the Wilcox Ranch might be hiring." Clara watched this exchange, aware of the tension crackling beneath the civility. Her hand unconsciously touched the wanted poster in her pocket. "Mind if my deputies take a look at your horse?" Wilson asked. "Fine animal. Uncommon breed for these parts?" "She's not stolen, if that's what you're asking," Ethan said, a slight edge entering his voice. "Got papers in my room if you need to see them." The smallest of smiles touched Wilson's mouth. "That won't be necessary yet." He turned to Clara. "The man we're looking for is dangerous, Miss Henderson. Ethan Morgan. Wanted for murder in Wyoming Territory. About 6 foot, dark hair, blue eyes. Been on the run near 3 weeks now." Clara felt Ethan stiffen beside her, though his expression remained neutral. Dark hair, blue eyes. Like half the men in the territory, like the man standing next to her. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Killed a rancher's son in cold blood," Wilson continued, watching Ethan as he spoke. "Dispute over a card game, they say?" "Terrible business," Ethan commented. "Hope you catch him." Wilson's gaze lingered on Ethan's bruised jaw. "That's a nasty mark you've got there, Cole. Bar fight in Fort Laramie. Fellow didn't appreciate losing." Wilson nodded slowly. "We'll be in town a few days. Bounty hunters are coming through as well. They're not as particular about proof as I am. I'd advise any travelers to make themselves known to me." This last part he directed pointedly at Ethan. After the sheriff and his deputies rode off, Clara and Ethan stood in silence. The wanted poster seemed to burn in her pocket. "Miss Henderson," Ethan finally said, "I think I'll be taking supper in my room tonight. If that's acceptable." Clara studied his face, the careful composure, the wariness in his eyes. "Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "is there something I should know about you?" His eyes met hers, direct and unflinching. "Probably best if there isn't." That evening, as Clara prepared a tray to take up to Ethan's room, the wanted poster lay unfolded on her kitchen table. The name Ethan Morgan seemed to leap from the page. Dark hair, blue eyes. Wanted for murder. Behind her, the kitchen door opened. Clara quickly covered the poster with a napkin as Sheriff Wilson stepped in, his presence filling the small space. "Making a special trip upstairs, I see," Sheriff Wilson observed. Eyeing the tray Clara had prepared, Clara placed a teapot on the tray, buying time to compose herself. "Mr. Cole isn't feeling well. Is that so?" Wilson picked up an apple from the fruit bowl, polishing it against his vest. "Sudden illness?" "Some men don't take to questioning well," Clara replied, more sharply than intended. Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Seems you've taken a shine to our Mr. Cole." "I take a shine to all my paying guests, Sheriff." Clara lifted the tray. Now, if you'll excuse me. One moment. Wilson blocked her path, his earlier civility hardening into something more official. That poster you were looking at when I came in, mind if I see it? Clara's pulse quickened. Just some old paper of my father's. Samuel kept interesting papers. Wilson reached past her, sliding the napkin aside to reveal the yellowed wanted poster. His eyes narrowed as he read it, then flickered to the handwritten note on the back. Your father's handwriting, isn't it? Clara remained silent. Wilson sighed. Samuel and I disagreed on many things, Miss Henderson. Justice being one of them. He believed in second chances. I believe some men don't deserve them. He tapped the poster. Jacob Reeves was found dead 6 months after this was printed. Shot in the back while resisting arrest, they claimed. Why are you telling me this? Because your father's soft heart nearly got him killed more than once. Wilson's voice softened slightly. I wouldn't see his daughter make the same mistake. After Wilson left, Clara hesitated at the foot of the stairs, the tray heavy in her hands. Her mind raced with questions. Was Ethan Cole really Ethan Morgan? Was he a murderer? Why did she feel this inexplicable urge to protect him? In her father's study, Clara set down the tray and pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk where she kept his journal. Samuel Henderson had meticulously recorded the inn's business for 30 years. Clara had read bits and pieces after his death, but had never gone through it thoroughly. Now she flipped to entries from around the time of the wanted poster, April 18th, 1869, she read. A man came today hungry and desperate. The law wants him for a crime he swears he didn't commit. I fed him, gave him rest, pointed him north. Some would call it harboring a criminal. I call it humanity. Clara turned page after page, finding similar entries, brief mentions of strangers given aid, directions, sometimes money. Her father, it seemed, had been running a different kind of establishment than she'd realized. A floorboard creaked overhead. Clara closed the journal and gathered the tray again, her decision made before she was fully aware of making it. Ethan opened his door cautiously at her knock. Miss Henderson, he said, surprise evident in his voice. May I come in, Mr. Cole? She kept her voice steady. Or should I say, Mr. Morgan? His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He stepped back, allowing her entry. Clara placed the tray on the small table by the window. Outside, the sun had begun its descent, painting the room in amber hues. She turned to face him directly, the journal clutched in one hand. The sheriff says you killed a man, she said without preamble. Ethan closed the door quietly. The sheriff says many things. Did you do it? He met her gaze unflinchingly. No. Then why are you running? Because the man I supposedly killed was Harrison Wilcox, son of the richest rancher in Wyoming Territory. Ethan's voice held no self-pity, just flat facts. He cheated at cards, pulled a knife when I called him on it. We struggled. He fell on his own blade, and no one believed you, would you? A drifter against the territory's golden sun. Ethan shook his head. Wilcox has the law, the judges, and every bounty hunter from here to Canada in his pocket. The only witness who might have spoken for me had an unfortunate accident the next day. Clara opened the journal, turning it so he could see. My father helped men like you. Ethan glanced at the page, then back to her face. Your father sounds like a good man. He was. Clara closed the journal. Until someone he helped came back and beat him half to death for the money in his safe. Ethan's expression softened. I'm sorry. Outside, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness. Clara moved to the window. A group of rough-looking men rode into town, dust-covered and armed. Bounty hunters, Ethan said quietly, coming to stand beside her. His shoulder nearly touched hers, the closest they had been. Clara turned to him, sudden fear gripping her. You need to leave. I'll be gone within the hour. No! Clara surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. Not at dusk. They'll be watching the roads. Wait until morning. Miss Henderson, Clara, she corrected, making a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. If you're staying under my roof and risking my life, you should at least use my given name. A faint smile touched his lips. Clara, then? He glanced toward the window. Those men won't stop at taking me. Anyone who helps me will be considered an accessory. More hoofbeats sounded. Closer now. Clara's heart pounded as she made the most impulsive decision of her carefully ordered life. Leave before nightfall, she pleaded, gripping his arm. Please, they'll kill you if they find you here. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe, he said softly, but if I ride out now, I'll never see you again. In that moment, with the sun setting behind him and danger approaching, Clara understood that some choices, once made, could never be unmade. The bounty hunters drew closer. The journal in her hands, her father's legacy, seemed to weigh heavier than before. The bounty hunters' arrival transformed Elkhorn's quiet main street into a scene of controlled chaos. 5 men, trail-worn and hard-eyed, dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. From Ethan's window, Clara watched Sheriff Wilson greet them with professional courtesy, but visible reluctance. They'll search the inn, Clara whispered. Drawing back from the window, Ethan nodded grimly. I should leave now before they organize. No, Clara's mind raced. They'll be watching for that. We need somewhere to hide you. She paced the small room, thinking of her father's journal entries. Where had Samuel Henderson hidden his fugitives? Clara froze mid-step. The pantry. Bit obvious, isn't it? Ethan said, already gathering his few possessions, not the pantry itself. Follow me and be quiet. They descended the back stairs that led from the guest rooms directly to the kitchen. Clara moved with surprising stealth for someone who'd spent her life in honest work. At the pantry door, she paused, listening for movement from the dining room. Clear, she whispered, ushering Ethan inside the small food storage room. The pantry was barely large enough for both of them. Clara knelt, pushing aside a worn rug to reveal wooden floorboards. She ran her fingers along the edge of one board, finding a nearly invisible groove. When she pressed it, a small section of the floor lifted to reveal a dark space beneath. My father's root cellar, she explained. I'd forgotten about it until today. Ethan stared at the hidden door with newfound respect. Your father was a careful man. More than I knew. Clara pulled the trapdoor fully open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. It's not comfortable, but it should be safe. As Ethan lowered himself into the hidden cellar, the front door of the inn crashed open. Clara quickly replaced the rug, heart hammering as heavy footsteps approached the dining room. Miss Henderson, a rough voice called. Sheriff says we need a word. Clara emerged from the pantry, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. Coming! In the dining room stood 3 of the bounty hunters, dust still clinging to their clothes. Their leader, a tall man with a face like tanned leather, removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Frank Doyle, ma'am. These are my associates, Lewis and Harmon. Sheriff Wilson said you've a full house tonight? Clara nodded, forcing her expression to remain neutral. 5 rooms occupied, including yours if you're staying. We are, Doyle confirmed. But first, business. We're looking for this man. He produced a wanted poster newer than the one Clara had found. The crude sketch resembled Ethan enough to be recognizable. Ethan Morgan, Doyle continued. Murderer. Worth $500 to whoever brings him in. His eyes scanned the room. Sheriff mentioned you had a stranger arrive yesterday. Cole, was it? Clara's mouth went dry. Mr. Cole, yes. He's taken ill, resting in his room. Mind if we have a look at him? Just to be certain. Of course, Clara said, the lie coming easier than expected. Though I'd appreciate if you'd keep your voices down. My other guests are trying to rest before their journeys tomorrow. She led them upstairs to Ethan's room, her mind racing. The bed was rumpled, but obviously empty. Ethan's saddlebag was gone. Seems your guest stepped out, Doyle observed, suspicious eyes taking in the room. Impossible. Clara feigned surprise. He was terribly feverish when I brought him tea earlier. Perhaps he's in the washroom. While the bounty hunters searched the upper floor, Clara returned to the dining room, where Sheriff Wilson now waited. Arms crossed. Your guest has curious timing. Miss Henderson, he said quietly. Clara busied herself straightening chairs. Mr. Cole mentioned needing fresh air. The fever left him restless. Wilson's mouth tightened. Clara, if you're harboring Morgan... I've never met any Ethan Morgan, she interrupted, the statement technically true. Now, will you and these men be wanting supper? I need to know how much to prepare." The bounty hunters returned, their expressions darkening the dining room's atmosphere. "No sign of him upstairs," Doyle reported to Wilson. "We'll check the stables and outbuildings." As they exited, Mrs. Porter entered, her usual impeccable timing bringing Clara both relief and anxiety. The older woman took in the scene with sharp eyes. My, she murmured, settling at her usual table. "Exciting evening at Henderson's Rest." Clara poured her tea with hands she willed not to shake. "Nothing exciting about rude men interrupting dinner preparations." Mrs. Porter leaned closer. "The hidden cellar beneath the pantry," she whispered. "Your father showed me once, years ago. Is that where you've put him?" Clara nearly dropped the teapot. "I don't know what—" "Hush, child. Samuel and I had no secrets." Mrs. Porter patted Clara's hand. "I'll create a distraction if they come back inside. These bounty hunters aren't half as clever as they believe themselves to be." After Mrs. Porter left and the inn finally quieted, Clara slipped back to the pantry. She lifted the trapdoor to find Ethan sitting on an old crate, a small lantern illuminating the cramped space. The cellar was more extensive than she'd remembered, a low-ceilinged room with shelves of preserved foods and several crates. In one corner lay a narrow cot. "My father planned for longer stays, it seems," Clara said, descending the ladder. Ethan nodded. "Your father was an extraordinary man." He gestured to the walls. "These were way stations on an underground path, for people who needed to disappear for a while." Clara ran her fingers along the rough-hewn beams. All these years, she'd lived above this secret space, never knowing the role her father had played in countless lives. Morning brought new challenges. Clara rose before dawn, her few hours of sleep leaving her gritty-eyed but alert. The bounty hunters had taken rooms at the inn, strategically positioning themselves to watch all comings and goings. Sheriff Wilson had returned to his office but promised to check in regularly. Clara prepared breakfast with mechanical efficiency, her mind on the man hidden beneath her pantry floor. She'd brought him food and water late in the night, their whispered conversation brief but charged with unspoken tension. "Morning, Miss Henderson," Frank Doyle greeted as he entered the dining room, his men trailing behind him. "Fine day for a manhunt." Clara forced a pleasant smile. "Breakfast will be ready shortly, gentlemen." As she served the bounty hunters, Clara overheard their plans to search the surrounding hills. A small reprieve, she thought, though they'd clearly left one man to watch the inn. When the dining room finally emptied, Clara carried a tray to the pantry, checking twice to ensure no one observed her. Below, Ethan sat on the cot, his back against the wall, something small and silver glinting in his hands. "Brought you breakfast," Clara said. Descending the ladder, Ethan quickly tucked the object into his pocket, but not before Clara glimpsed a harmonica, worn silver, dented at one corner. "Don't stop on my account," she said. Setting the tray beside him, Ethan hesitated, then withdrew the instrument. "Didn't want to make noise. The pantry's thick-walled. No one will hear if you play softly." Clara settled on a crate opposite him. "I didn't take you for a musician." A faint smile touched his lips. "Not much of one, just something to pass time on the trail." He turned the harmonica in his fingers. "My father taught me. Said a man needs something beautiful in his life, even when everything else goes to hell." He sounds wise. He was. Ethan's expression grew distant. "Branch foreman in Montana. Taught me everything worth knowing. Horses, cattle, reading the weather." He paused. "Died in a stampede when I was 16. "I'm sorry." Ethan shrugged. "Life happens as it will." He raised the harmonica to his lips and played a few soft notes, a melancholy melody that seemed to fill the small space with unexpected beauty. Clara closed her eyes, the simple tune washing over her. For a moment, the danger above them faded, leaving only this connection between two people in a hidden room beneath the world. When he finished, Clara opened her eyes to find him watching her intently. "My father used to play that same song," she said quietly. "Red River Valley." Ethan nodded. "Old Cowboy favorite. He'd play it on quiet evenings." Clara smiled at the memory. "I'd forgotten until now." Ethan offered her the harmonica. "Do you play?" She shook her head. Never learned. Here, he held it out. Press your lips like this. Breathe in and out gently. Clara hesitated, then accepted the instrument. Their fingers brushed, lingering a moment longer than necessary. She raised the harmonica to her lips, aware that his mouth had been there moments before, and tried as he instructed. A discordant wheeze emerged, making them both laugh. Not quite, Ethan said, his smile transforming his face. Clearly not my calling, Clara replied, returning the harmonica. How did you come to be a ranch hand? After your father bounced around for a while. Drove cattle up from Texas, broke horses in Colorado. Ethan pocketed the harmonica. Was working the Wilcox spread when... His expression darkened. When Harrison Wilcox cheated at cards. Clara finished. Ethan nodded. Never meant to stay there long anyway. Old man Wilcox treats his men like property. Harrison was worse. Had a mean streak a mile wide. And no one would testify that it was self-defense. One man might have. Walt Simmons saw the whole thing. Ethan's jaw tightened. Found him with a broken neck the next morning. Fell from his horse, they said. Clara shivered. These are dangerous men, which is why you shouldn't be involved. Ethan leaned forward. I can leave tonight under cover of darkness and go where? They're watching the roads. I've evaded worse. Clara stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Stay put. At least until we have a proper plan. Above them, the inn's front door opened and closed. Clara tensed, listening to footsteps cross the dining room floor. Miss Henderson, Sheriff Wilson's voice called. I'll be back when I can, Clara whispered. Quickly climbing the ladder, she emerged from the pantry with a jar of preserves in hand, composing her features into a mask of mild surprise as she entered the dining room. Sheriff, she greeted. Back so soon? Wilson removed his hat, studying her face. Thought I'd check if your Mr. Cole has returned from his constitutional. I'm afraid not. Clara moved behind the counter, putting distance between Wilson and the pantry. Perhaps he found passage on the morning stage. Perhaps. Wilson's tone made it clear he believed otherwise. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Man matches Morgan's description arrives, then vanishes just as we come looking. Coincidences happen, Clara replied, busying herself with wiping already clean glasses. Not in my experience. Wilson stepped closer. Clara, if you're protecting him, why would I protect a stranger? She interrupted. Especially one accused of murder. Wilson's expression softened slightly. Because you're Samuel Henderson's daughter. And he never could resist a hard luck story. Below, hidden in the cellar with only a harmonica for company, Ethan waited, unaware that his very presence was forcing Clara to confront truths about herself and her father that she'd never fully acknowledged. 3 days passed with Ethan, hidden beneath the pantry floor. Clara maintained her routine with determined normalcy, serving meals, cleaning rooms, exchanging pleasantries with guests. The bounty hunters remained, their presence a constant reminder of the danger concealed beneath her feet. On the evening of the 3rd day, Mrs. Porter arrived for tea earlier than usual, clutching a wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Thought you might need these, she said softly, sliding the box across the kitchen table once they were alone. Clara opened it carefully. Inside lay an assortment of small glass bottles, packets of herbs, clean bandages and a sewing kit. For your guest, Mrs. Porter explained. That bruise on his jaw when he arrived, I doubt it was his only injury. Clara stared at her friend. How did you know? Mrs. Porter smiled gently. I knew your father for 40 years, child. I recognize the look of someone carrying his legacy. She tapped the box. Samuel and I worked together more than once. This was our signal. When I brought my medicine box, it meant someone needed help downstairs. Clara's eyes widened. You knew all along, not specifics, Mrs. Porter clarified. Just that your father occasionally sheltered those in need. I provided medical care when necessary. Why didn't you tell me? Samuel wanted to protect you, Mrs. Porter sighed. After your mother died, you became his whole world. He feared what might happen if his activities were discovered. Clara traced the inlay on the box. The man downstairs, he's hurt worse than he's letting on. Men usually are, Mrs. Porter replied dryly. especially the proud ones. After Mrs. Porter left, Clara brought the medicine box to the cellar. She found Ethan sitting against the wall, his face paler than it had been that morning. "You're in pain," she said, not a question. Ethan shook his head, but the slight wince betrayed him. "I've had worse. Let me see." Reluctantly, Ethan lifted his shirt to reveal a long gash along his left side, crudely bandaged with a torn strip of cloth. The wound had begun to redden around the edges, early signs of infection. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara demanded, opening Mrs. Porter's box. "You're risking enough already." Clara ignored his protest, sorting through the box's contents until she found a small brown bottle. "This will sting," she warned, soaking a clean cloth with the antiseptic solution. Ethan held still as she cleaned the wound, his jaw clenched against the pain. Only the slight tension in his shoulders revealed his discomfort. "How did this happen?" Clara asked, applying a salve of herbs from one of Mrs. Porter's packets. "One of Wilcox's men caught up to me near Fort Laramie. Had a knife. And you've been riding with this untreated?" Clara shook her head in disbelief. "It's a wonder fever hasn't taken you. Cleaned it as best I could in streams along the way." Clara began wrapping fresh bandages around his torso. The intimacy of the act wasn't lost on her, her fingers against his skin, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the trust implicit in allowing her this close. "You're good at this," Ethan observed. "I cared for my father in his final weeks," Clara replied quietly. "After the attack?" Ethan watched her face as she worked. "You loved him very much. He was all I had." Clara secured the bandage with a small pin from the box. "I've been angry with him since discovering what he did, putting himself at risk, keeping secrets from me. But now you're doing the same thing," Ethan finished. Clara sat back on her heels. "I suppose I am." Their eyes met in the lantern light, an understanding passing between them that went beyond words. Clara became acutely aware of their proximity, of the silence broken only by their breathing. Ethan reached up slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Clara!" A crash from above shattered the moment. Heavy footsteps crossed the dining room floor, followed by raised voices. Clara quickly gathered the medicine supplies. "Stay quiet," she whispered, climbing the ladder. In the dining room, Doyle and his men had returned from their day's search. More irritable than ever. 3 days, Doyle was saying to Sheriff Wilson. 3 days and not a trace. "Perhaps he's moved on," Wilson suggested. Doyle shook his head. "My instincts say he's still here." His eyes narrowed as Clara emerged from the kitchen. "Miss Henderson, find anything interesting in your pantry?" Clara's heart hammered. "Just supplies for tomorrow's breakfast." Later that night, after the inn had quieted, Clara returned to the cellar with a fresh lantern and a cold supper. Ethan looked better already, Mrs. Porter's remedies having reduced the angry red around his wound. "They're getting impatient," Clara warned, setting down the food. "How long before they search the inn more thoroughly?" "I should leave tomorrow," Ethan said. "I put you at risk too long already." Clara shook her head. "Your wound needs time to heal properly. Besides, they're still watching the roads. I can't stay here indefinitely, just a few more days." Clara surprised herself with the urgency in her voice. "Until you're stronger." Ethan studied her face in the lantern light. "Why are you doing this, Clara? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" She had no ready answer, only the certainty that the thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, created an ache she couldn't explain. Instead of responding, she reached for his bandage. "Let me check your dressing before I go back up." As she leaned forward, Ethan caught her hand. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. For a heartbeat, they remained still, connected by that simple contact. Then Clara gently pulled away, afraid of what might happen if she didn't. "Good night, Mr. Cole," she said formally, retreating to the ladder. "Ethan," he corrected softly. "After saving my life, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Clara paused on the ladder, looking back at him. "Good night, Ethan." Above them the inn creaked and settled, sheltering their secret for one more night. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of horses departing. From her window, She watched Doyle and 3 of his men ride out toward the eastern hills, leaving behind only the youngest of their group to watch the inn. A cautious hope rose in her chest. Perhaps they were giving up on Elkhorn. In the dining room, the remaining bounty hunter, barely more than a boy, with a scraggly attempt at a beard, sat nursing a coffee, eyes constantly darting to the windows. "They've gone to check rumors of a camp in the Eastern Pass," he explained when Clara inquired. Back by sundown, the reprieve was temporary but welcome. Clara served her regular guests breakfast, then slipped into her father's old study, a small room off the kitchen she rarely entered now. Samuel's possessions remained largely as he'd left them. Books on his shelves, pipe on his desk, the old gun cabinet locked in the corner. She needed to think beyond day-to-day hiding. Ethan couldn't remain beneath her floor forever. Eventually, either the bounty hunters would find him or his wound would heal enough for him to leave. Neither outcome brought Clara comfort. As she absently sorted through her father's desk, her fingers found a small metal object tucked in the back of a drawer. A tarnished silver star, a sheriff's badge. Clara stared at it in confusion. Her father had never been a lawman as far as she knew. She turned the badge over, reading the inscription on the back. Samuel Henderson, Sheriff, Cottonwood Creek, 1854-1859. Clara? Mrs. Porter's voice startled her. The older woman stood in the doorway. "Your young watchdog has fallen asleep at his post." Clara quickly pocketed the badge. "What brings you by so early?" Mrs. Porter closed the door behind her. News travels fast in small towns. The bounty hunter's departure has tongues wagging. She lowered her voice. "Now might be your chance to move him." "Move him where?" "My house has a root cellar as well." Mrs. Porter's eyes twinkled. "Not as spacious as yours, but adequate, and the last place they'd look." Clara hesitated, the badge heavy in her pocket. "There's something I need to ask you. About my father." She placed the star on the desk between them. Mrs. Porter's expression shifted to one of recognition. "Ah, you found it. He was a sheriff?" "Before coming here," Mrs. Porter nodded, "in Wyoming Territory when it was still wild country. He was a good lawman, fair, respected, until the Cottonwood Creek incident. What happened? A wealthy landowner's son killed a homesteader in a dispute over water rights. Samuel arrested him, determined to see justice done." Mrs. Porter sighed. "But money speaks louder than truth. The charges were dismissed, and Samuel was forced out for overzealousness in pursuit of a respected citizen." Clara fingered the badge. "So he came here and, what, became an outlaw sympathizer? He became a man who understood that law and justice aren't always the same thing." Mrs. Porter placed her hand over Clara's. "Samuel believed everyone deserved a fair chance, not just those who could afford to buy their way out of trouble." The badge seemed to grow warmer in Clara's hand. A tangible connection to a father she was only now beginning to understand. Does Sheriff Wilson know? "He knows some of it. He and your father had a complicated relationship." A thought struck Clara. "Wilson said Jacob Reeves, the man from that old wanted poster, was found shot in the back while resisting arrest." "That's the official story," Mrs. Porter agreed grimly. "The truth died with him." Later, after Mrs. Porter left, Clara descended to the cellar with the badge tucked in her pocket. Ethan sat on the cot looking markedly better. The color had returned to his face, and he moved with less stiffness. "I've been thinking," Clara said, after explaining the bounty hunter's temporary absence. "Mrs. Porter has offered her cellar as another hiding place. We could move you tonight." Ethan shook his head. "Too risky. If we're seen, you'll both be implicated. Then what? You can't stay here forever." "No." Ethan met her gaze directly. "But I could clear my name." Clara raised her eyebrows. "How?" "Find Walt Simmons' brother in Silver Creek. He told me once that Walt kept a journal. If he wrote about what he saw that night, that's a slim hope. Better than none." Ethan stood, pacing the small space. "I'm tired of running, Clara, tired of hiding in cellars while men with guns search for me." Clara fingered the badge in her pocket, thinking of her father, the lawman who became disillusioned with the law but never with justice. "My father was a sheriff," she said. withdrawing the badge and holding it out to him. "Before I was born," Ethan took the star, examining it with surprise. "You never knew?" "He kept many secrets." Clara recounted what Mrs. Porter had told her. "I think that's why he helped men like you. He knew the law could be twisted by those with money and power." Ethan returned the badge, his fingers lingering against hers. "Your father sounds like a man I would have respected. He would have said the same about you." Clara wasn't sure how she knew this to be true, only that it was. A moment of understanding passed between them, deeper than words. Then Ethan's expression turned serious. "Clara, if I had a chance to clear my name, would you help me? It would mean more risk, more deception." The weight of the badge in her hand seemed to pull her toward a decision. Samuel Henderson had been a man who stood for what he believed was right, even when it cost him his badge, his reputation, and ultimately, perhaps, his life. "What would you need me to do?" she asked. "First, find a way to get a message to Silver Creek." Ethan's eyes held a spark of hope for the first time since she'd met him. And then he glanced upward toward the inn above them and the world beyond that still hunted him. Evening descended on Henderson's Rest with unusual quiet. With most of the bounty hunters gone and only their young lookout remaining, the inn felt almost normal again. Clara served a light supper to her few regular guests, her mind working through possibilities for contacting Silver Creek without arousing suspicion. After the dining room emptied and the young bounty hunter retreated to his room, Clara locked the front door and moved through the inn, extinguishing lamps. In the shadowy common room, her eyes fell upon the old piano that sat unused in the corner, her mother's prized possession, brought over the mountains at great expense 30 years earlier. Clara ran her fingers along the dusty lid. Catherine Henderson had played beautifully, filling the inn with music until consumption silenced her forever. After her death, Samuel had kept the piano tuned but rarely opened it, each note a painful reminder of his loss. On impulse, Clara lifted the lid and pressed a key. The note rang out, surprisingly in tune, despite years of neglect. She sat on the bench, her fingers finding a simple melody her mother had taught her as a child. After playing a few halting measures, she became aware of movement behind her. Clara turned to find Ethan standing in the shadows of the hallway that led to the kitchen. "You shouldn't be up here," she whispered. Though there was no one to overhear. "Heard the music?" He moved closer, his steps silent despite his size. "Couldn't resist." In the dim light, with his wounded side healing and several days of proper rest, Ethan looked more like the man he must have been before becoming a fugitive, strong, composed, his eyes clear and alert. "My mother's piano," Clara explained. "I don't play often. Don't stop on my account." Ethan approached the instrument with obvious appreciation. "Beautiful piece, you know pianos." A half-smile touched his lips. "Might surprise you what a ranch hand picks up along the way." He sat beside her on the bench, the closeness sending a flutter through her chest. "May I?" Clara nodded, watching in amazement as his hands moved across the keys with unexpected skill, drawing out a melancholy tune that filled the darkened room. Despite his size and the roughness of his life, Ethan played with a delicate touch that transformed the neglected instrument. "Where did you learn?" she asked when he finished. "My mother taught me as a boy. Later, worked a cattle drive with a trail cook who had a battered upright in his wagon. Odd old fellow, but a fine musician." Ethan's fingers idly traced another melody, softer now. "Music reminds me there's more to life than survival." Clara found herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands that could gentle a horse, play a harmonica, coax beauty from aged piano keys. Hands that had defended their owner against Harrison Wilcox with fatal results. "I've been thinking about Silver Creek," she said, keeping her voice low. "The stagecoach passes through here on Thursday. I could send a letter to Walt Simmons' brother. Too risky. Doyle's men might be checking the mail." Clara considered. "Mrs. Porter's nephew drives the supply wagon to Silver Creek every 2 weeks. He's due tomorrow." Ethan nodded slowly. Would she trust him with this? Mrs. Porter says he's reliable, and he owes my father a debt. Samuel helped him once when he was in trouble. They sat in silence for a moment, the piano keys cool beneath their fingers. Clara was acutely aware of Ethan's proximity, the warmth of him beside her on the narrow bench. "Play with me?" he asked suddenly. "Something simple." Clara hesitated. "I'm not very good." "Neither am I," Ethan replied with that half-smile that transformed his face. "But music sounds better when it's shared." He positioned her hands on the right side of the keyboard, taking the lower register himself. With gentle guidance, he led her through a simple duet, their hands occasionally brushing as they played. The melody was sweet and uncomplicated, yet in the quiet it felt like something profound, a conversation without words, a connection beyond their shared danger. For a few precious minutes, they were simply a man and woman making music together, the rest of the world and its troubles held at bay by the piano's voice. When the final notes faded, neither moved immediately, the spell of the moment holding them in place. Clara turned to find Ethan watching her, his expression open and unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. "Clara," he said softly, her name almost a caress on his lips. The sudden pounding on the inn's front door shattered their reverie. Clara jumped to her feet as Sheriff Wilson's voice called out, "Miss Henderson, I need a word." Ethan was already moving, silent as a shadow, toward the kitchen and the cellar below. Clara quickly closed the piano lid and smoothed her skirt, her heart racing as she went to answer the door. Wilson stood on her porch, hat in hand, but expression grave. "Evening, Clara. Sorry to disturb you so late. Is something wrong, Sheriff?" "Depends on your definition of wrong." Wilson stepped inside without waiting for invitation. "Thought you might like to know. 2 more bounty hunters arrived this afternoon. These ones directly employed by Randall Wilcox himself." Clara's blood ran cold. "I see. They're not like Doyle and his men." Wilson's voice held genuine concern. "These are professionals, killers. They don't care about bringing Morgan in alive." "Why tell me this?" Clara asked carefully. Wilson studied her face in the dim light. "Because despite our differences, I respected your father." He glanced toward the piano, its lid now closed, but the music still hanging in the air between them. "Because I've never heard you play that piano in all the years I've known you." With that cryptic statement, he replaced his hat and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Whatever you're involved in, Clara, be careful. These new men don't care who gets hurt as long as they collect their money." After he left, Clara stood frozen in the middle of her common room, the echo of the piano duet still lingering in the silence. Now tainted by fresh fear, the morning brought unwelcome confirmation of Wilson's warning. 2 new men arrived at Henderson's Rest for breakfast, one tall and gaunt with dead eyes, the other compact and heavily scarred. Unlike Doyle's rough-edged crew, these men carried themselves with cold precision. They ate quietly, watching everything, speaking little. "Thomas Beck and Elias Ward," Mrs. Porter whispered when she arrived for her morning tea. "Worked for the Pinkertons before going private. Now they take special commissions for wealthy clients." Clara kept her expression neutral as she poured tea. "You know them?" "Know of them," Mrs. Porter corrected. "My nephew refuses to transport them. Says they enjoy their work too much." Clara glanced at the men, who were methodically finishing their breakfast. "Will your nephew still help us?" "He'll be here by noon," Mrs. Porter confirmed. "Already briefed him. He'll carry your message to Silver Creek, but Clara," she lowered her voice further, "with these men in town, your guest needs to be ready to leave at a moment's notice after breakfast." While the new bounty hunters conferred with Doyle's remaining man, Clara slipped away to her father's study. From a locked cabinet, she withdrew a rolled parchment, Samuel Henderson's map of the territory, meticulously annotated during his years of helping fugitives. The yellowed map covered the kitchen table, revealing not just the main trails but smaller paths, caves, water sources, and safe houses marked with subtle symbols. Samuel had created a comprehensive escape network, hidden in plain sight as an ordinary map. "A lifetime of knowledge," Clara murmured, tracing the faded ink with her fingertip. Some markings were clearly in a code she didn't. Understand small symbols next to certain locations that might indicate friendly homesteads or dangerous areas. She carefully rolled the map again when she heard footsteps approaching. Beck, the taller of the new bounty hunters, appeared in the doorway. "Miss Henderson," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a dangerous-looking man. "My associate and I require rooms for several nights." Clara nodded stiffly. "Of course. 75 cents per night in advance." Beck placed exact change on the counter, his movements deliberate and precise. "We're looking for a man." "Ethan Morgan. Sheriff Wilson tells us you've had no strangers matching his description. Only regular travelers and Mr. Cole, who left several days ago." Beck's pale eyes studied her face. "Interesting timing, his departure. Many guests come and go," Clara replied evenly. "It's the nature of an inn." "Indeed," Beck smiled without warmth. "My associate and I would like to examine Mr. Cole's former room, if you don't mind." It wasn't a request. Clara led them upstairs, her mind racing. The room had been cleaned thoroughly after Ethan's departure, but these men weren't like Doyle's crude searchers. Beck and Ward spent 30 minutes in the small room, examining every floorboard, wall panel, and piece of furniture. They worked in near silence, communicating with gestures and glances born of long partnership. When they finished, Clara expected relief, but their expressions remained unchanged. "A well-kept establishment," Beck commented as they returned downstairs. "Your father built it, I understand?" "Yes, 30 years ago." "Old buildings have many secrets," Ward spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly. "Hidden spaces. False walls. Priest holes, they called them in England." Clara's blood ran cold at how close he'd come to the truth, but she kept her face impassive. "Just honest craftsmanship here, Mr. Ward. Nothing so dramatic." By midday, Mrs. Porter's nephew arrived with his supply wagon. A broad-shouldered man with kind eyes that belied his intimidating size. Clara passed him a sealed letter while loading supplies, the exchange hidden from watching eyes. 2 days to Silver Creek, he murmured. "I'll find Simmons and bring back whatever he has." When Clara returned to the cellar that evening, she brought the map with her. Ethan studied it intently, his finger tracing potential escape routes. "Your father was thorough," he said admiringly. "This northern passage, it doesn't appear on any official maps. Local hunters and trappers use it," Clara explained. "Too narrow for wagons, so the stagecoach company ignores it." Ethan pointed to a small cabin marked near a mountain stream. "What's this?" "Old line shack. My father maintained it as a waypoint." Clara hesitated. "It's 3 days' hard ride, but if you had to run—" "You've thought about this a lot," Ethan observed. "I need to be prepared." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Beck and Ward aren't like the others. They'll find you eventually if you stay." Ethan rolled the map carefully. 2 days until we hear from Silver Creek. If there's no evidence in Walt's journal, then you use this map and go." Clara finished for him, the words bitter in her mouth. He looked at her for a long moment. "And if there is evidence, what then?" "Then we fight," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "My father believed in justice even when the law failed." "So do I." Ethan reached across the small table between them, his hand covering hers. "Clara Henderson," he said softly, "you are the bravest person I've ever known." The moment stretched between them, charged with things unsaid. Clara was acutely aware of his touch, the warmth of his hand over hers, the map beneath their joined hands, representing both escape and possibility. "If I have to leave," Ethan said finally, his voice low, "would you consider coming with me?" The question hung in the air, momentous and frightening. Clara had never imagined leaving Henderson's Rest. It was her heritage, her responsibility, her safe harbor. Yet the thought of Ethan riding away alone, never to return, created an ache she couldn't ignore. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "This inn is all I've ever known." "It's not all you are," Ethan replied. His fingers tightened slightly on hers. "Your father built this place, but he lived many lives before settling here. Perhaps his daughter is more like him than she knows." Above them, the floorboards creaked as someone walked through the dining room. Clara reluctantly withdrew her hand, the map still lying between them, a chart of potential futures neither could clearly see. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Clara maintained her routine with deliberate normalcy, while Beck and Ward conducted their methodical search of the town. They interviewed every resident, inspected every building, and spent long hours studying the surrounding terrain with field glasses. By evening, Clara's nerves were stretched thin. As she cleaned her father's desk, a task she'd been neglecting, her hand brushed against a loose panel in the back of the bottom drawer. Curious, she pressed it, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Addressed simply, Sheriff Wilson. Clara stared at her father's handwriting, the ink faded but unmistakable. Why would Samuel Henderson have a hidden letter for Wilson that he never delivered? She debated with herself only briefly before carefully opening the seal. The letter was dated 3 weeks before her father's death. James, it began, using Wilson's first name, with a familiarity Clara had never heard her father express in life. I write this knowing you may never read it, but hoping our long history still counts for something. We were friends once, before ambition and disagreement drove us apart. I appeal to that friendship now. You've suspected my activities for years, helping those I believe deserve a second chance. You've looked the other way, for which I'm grateful. But now I must ask more of you. Randall Wilcox has discovered my involvement in helping Jesse Burke escape last year. He sent men to make an example of me. If you're reading this, they've likely succeeded. I ask nothing for myself. My choices were made with open eyes. But Clara knows nothing of my activities. She is innocent. If harm comes to me, please ensure she remains safe and Wilcox's vengeance ends with me. Despite our differences, you are a good man, James. A better lawman than I was. Perhaps that's why I failed and you succeeded. Your old friend, Samuel Henderson. Clara read the letter twice, her hands trembling. Her father hadn't been killed by random road agents, as she'd always believed. He'd been murdered on Randall Wilcox's orders, the same man now hunting Ethan. Wilson frowned but nodded, following her to the kitchen. Once alone, Clara handed him the letter, watching his face as he read it. Emotions chased across the sheriff's features, surprise, pain, and finally, a deep sadness. "Where did you find this?" he asked hoarsely. "My father's desk, hidden." Clara studied him. "Is it true? Was Randall Wilcox responsible for my father's death?" Wilson folded the letter carefully. "I suspected. Could never prove it." He looked older suddenly, burdened. "Samuel and I, we were deputies together in Wyoming. Best friends before life took us in different directions. And you never told me. What good would it have done?" Wilson's eyes met hers. "You were devastated by his loss. Knowing it was deliberate murder rather than random violence, would that have comforted you?" Clara absorbed this, her world shifting beneath her feet. "Did you know about his activities? Helping fugitives?" A slight nod. "Not officially. Preferred not to have evidence I'd need to act on. And now?" Clara asked quietly. "Will you act now?" Wilson studied the letter again. "Beck believes Morgan, or Cole, if that's truly who he is, never left town. He thinks you're hiding him." Clara said nothing, her silence its own answer. "These men don't care about justice, Clara," Wilson continued softly. "They want their bounty. If they find him here, they'll kill him. And anyone who helped him, like they killed my father?" The words came out sharper than intended. Wilson flinched. "Your father asked me to keep you safe. I've tried in my way." He took a deep breath. "If Morgan is innocent, as you seem to believe, there's only one path forward. Hard evidence that can't be ignored or buried." "Walt Simmons' journal," Clara whispered. Wilson's eyebrows rose. "You know about that?" "Mrs. Porter's nephew is bringing it from Silver Creek." "When?" "Tomorrow, if all goes well." Wilson handed the letter back to her. "I can keep Beck and Ward occupied for 1 day." "No longer." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father was right about one thing, Clara. I was the better lawman. But Samuel was the better man." After he left, Clara stood motionless in the kitchen, her father's final letter clutched in her hand. The truth it contained, reshaping everything she thought she knew. Randall Wilcox had ordered her father's death, and now his men were here, hunting another man Wilcox wanted silenced. When she finally descended to the cellar, Ethan took one look at her face and knew something had changed. "What happened?" he asked. Clara handed him the letter, watching as he read it, his expression hardening with each line. "Wilcox," he said finally, the name like poison on his tongue. "Always Wilcox. It's not just about clearing your name anymore," Clara said quietly. "It's about justice for my father, too." Ethan carefully refolded the letter. "Clara, this changes things. Wilcox doesn't just want me silenced. He wants anyone who stands against him destroyed." "I know," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I'm my father's daughter. I won't be intimidated by wealthy men who think they're above the law." Ethan studied her face in the lamplight. "Even if it costs you everything?" Clara thought of the inn above them, her safe, ordered life, all she had ever known. Then she thought of her father, dying without justice, and Ethan hunted for a crime he didn't commit. "Some things," she said softly, "are worth the cost." Morning dawned with an uneasy quiet. Clara served breakfast mechanically, her mind on Mrs. Porter's nephew and his precious cargo from Silver Creek. If Walt Simmons's journal contained the evidence they needed, everything could change. If not, Beck and Ward took their coffee on the porch, watching the street with predatory patience. Sheriff Wilson had left at dawn, mentioning a disturbance in the Eastern Hills that required investigation, taking Beck's young associate with him. A small reprieve, but welcome. Shortly before noon, Clara was startled by a knock at the kitchen door. Sheriff Wilson stood there, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here." Clara followed him to the stables behind the inn, her heart racing. "What's happened?" Wilson glanced around to ensure they weren't observed. "Mrs. Porter's nephew was stopped on the road back from Silver Creek. Someone knew he was coming." Cold fear washed over Clara. "Is he?" "He's alive," Wilson assured her. "Roughed up, but alive. They took everything he was carrying." "The journal?" Wilson nodded grimly. "If it existed, it's gone now." Clara leaned against a stall door, despair threatening to overwhelm her. Their one hope of evidence vanished. "There's more," Wilson said, reaching inside his coat. "I found this in my office this morning. Hidden in my desk." He withdrew a small leather-bound book, not a journal but a ledger. The sheriff's private accounting book, meticulously maintained in Wilson's neat handwriting. "I've kept records of all official transactions since becoming sheriff," Wilson explained, opening the ledger. "But someone has been making entries I never authorized." He turned the book toward Clara. There, in handwriting similar to Wilson's but subtly different, were entries recording regular payments from RW to JW for services rendered. "Someone has been recording fake payments from Randall Wilcox to me," Wilson said, his voice tight with anger. "Creating a paper trail of bribes I never received." Clara studied the forgery. "Why show me this?" "Because whoever did this had access to my office, my records. Someone trusted." Wilson's eyes were hard. "Someone setting me up to take the fall if questions arise about Morgan's case." He turned another page, revealing the most recent entry, a substantial payment for final resolution of Monsieur problem. Understanding dawned on Clara. "They're creating evidence that you've been paid to kill Ethan." "Exactly. When Morgan's body is found, this ledger will surface. I'll be implicated as Wilcox's corrupt enforcer, but who would have access to your office?" Wilson's mouth tightened. "Few people. My deputies. The clerk who cleans. And Beck, I gave him full access when he arrived as professional courtesy." "Beck works for Wilcox," Clara said, the pieces falling into place. "He's not just hunting Ethan, he's creating a trail to protect Wilcox if the truth ever comes out." Wilson nodded grimly. "Morgan was never meant to stand trial. Too risky, he might tell his side. Better for everyone if he's found dead, resisting arrest, with a corrupt local sheriff to blame." Clara's mind raced. "What about Doyle and his men?" "Useful idiot," Wilson said bluntly. "Bounty hunters looking for reward money. They don't know they're part of a larger plan. Clara stared at the forged ledger, its implications staggering. Why are you showing me this? Because I owed your father better than I gave him in life. Wilson's voice softened. And because no innocent man should die for Randall Wilcox's crimes. The sheriff closed the ledger, returning it to his coat. Beck will move soon. Today, most likely. He's not a man who waits once his target is located. You think he knows where Ethan is? I think he suspects. The way he watches this place, the questions he asks in town. Wilson shook his head. It's only a matter of time. Clara's hands clenched. What do we do? I've bought you until nightfall. Told Beck I had reliable information. Morgan was spotted near the Broken Ridge mines. Wilson met her gaze directly. Get him out, Clara. Use your father's routes. I'll handle things here as best I can. As Clara turned to leave, Wilson caught her arm. Clara, when this is over, I can't protect you. Not if you help him escape. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not asking for protection, Sheriff. I'm doing what's right, like your father, Wilson said softly, a complex emotion in his eyes. Back in the inn, Clara moved with calm purpose, preparing for what must come. In her father's study, she gathered what they would need, the map, money from the safe. Her father's old pistol she'd never fired, but kept loaded. As she worked, her eyes fell on the sheriff's ledger entry, final resolution of Monsieur Problem. The coldness of it chilled her. This wasn't justice or even law. It was calculated elimination of an inconvenient truth. When she returned to the cellar, Ethan could see the change in her immediately. What's happened? He asked, rising from the cot where he'd been studying the map. Clara explained quickly. The ambush of Mrs. Porter's nephew, the forged ledger, Wilson's warning. We need to leave, she concluded. Tonight. Wilson's bought us until then, but Beck will realize he's been misled. Ethan absorbed this, his expression hardening. And go where? Without the journal, it's my word against Wilcox's. And Wilcox owns half the judges in the territory. North, Clara said decisively. To my father's line shack first, then to the territorial capital if necessary. The governor isn't in Wilcox's pocket, from what my father used to say. Ethan studied her face. We, Clara? You mean to come with me? Yes. The simplicity of her answer belied the momentousness of the decision. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's mine too. As darkness approached, Clara made final preparations, while Ethan remained hidden. The forged ledger Wilson had shown her kept returning to her thoughts, not just for what it revealed about the plot against Ethan, but for what it suggested about Wilson himself. The sheriff had spent years cultivating an image of rigid adherence to the law. Yet today he had chosen to help them, knowing it might cost him everything. People, Clara was learning, contained multitudes. Her father, Wilson, perhaps even herself. Dusk settled over Henderson's Rest, bringing with it a tense quiet. Clara moved through her evening routine with forced normalcy, serving supper to her few remaining guests, while acutely aware of Beck watching her from his corner table. Ward had disappeared hours ago. To scout the surrounding area, Clara suspected. In her bedroom, Clara packed a small saddlebag with essentials, a change of clothes, her savings sewn into a cloth pouch, basic provisions. Her hand hesitated over her mother's jewelry box. Most items she could leave behind, but one, her mother's gold wedding ring on its simple chain, she carefully removed and placed in her pocket. Catherine Henderson had worn it until her dying day. If Clara was leaving everything behind, this small piece of her mother would come with her. The weight of the ring in her pocket was both burden and comfort. For nearly 30 years, Clara had defined herself by this place. Samuel Henderson's daughter, the innkeeper, the woman who locked her doors at sundown and lived by careful rules. Now she was preparing to become someone else entirely. Someone who rode out into darkness with a wanted man, who chose danger over safety, justice over security. Clara touched the ring through the fabric of her dress. Would her mother understand this choice? Catherine Henderson had left a comfortable life back east to follow Samuel to the frontier. Perhaps there was more of her mother's courage in Clara than she'd realized. A soft knock at the back door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Porter stood there, her face lined with worry. "Is it time?" she asked without preamble. Clara nodded. "After the dining room closes. Through the cellar and out the old storm door. You're certain about going with him?" Mrs. Porter's eyes were kind but searching. "I am." The older woman sighed, then drew Clara into a tight embrace. "Samuel would be proud," she whispered, "though he'd worry terribly. Will you be all right?" "When they realize I've gone, don't fret about me," Mrs. Porter said firmly. "I was managing difficult men before you were born." She pressed something into Clara's hand, a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Medicines. You might need them where you're going." After Mrs. Porter left, Clara completed her preparations. She wrote a brief note for Sheriff Wilson, thanking him for his help and explaining that she couldn't stand by while an innocent man was hunted. Whether Wilson would see it as noble or foolish, she couldn't say. As the evening progressed, Clara grew increasingly uneasy. Beck remained at his table long after finishing his meal, nursing a coffee and watching her with predatory patience. The few other diners departed, leaving the dining room unnervingly empty except for Beck's looming presence. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Beck?" Clara asked, her voice steadier than her nerves. Beck smiled thinly. "Just settling my account, Miss Henderson. I believe my associate and I will be moving on tonight." Clara's pulse quickened. "Tonight? I thought you'd paid through tomorrow." "Plans change." Beck placed coins on the table with deliberate precision. "We've received information that makes our continued presence here unnecessary." The implication in his words was clear. They knew, or thought they knew, where to find Ethan. Clara maintained her composure with effort. "I see. I'll ready your bill." "No rush," Beck replied, watching her face. "We have a few matters to attend to first." He rose smoothly. "Good evening, Miss Henderson." After he left, Clara waited precisely 5 minutes before locking the front door and moving swiftly through her closing routine. Her hands trembled slightly as she extinguished lamps, every sound magnified in the empty inn. In the kitchen, she gathered their final provisions and descended to the cellar. Ethan was ready, his few possessions packed, her father's map tucked securely in his coat. "Beck's gone," Clara reported. "Says they're leaving tonight, but I think it's a trap." "They know something," Ethan nodded grimly. "Ward's been watching the back of the inn for hours. I caught glimpses through the storm door grate." Clara's breath caught. "Then we're trapped." "Not yet." Ethan studied her face in the lamplight. "There's still the root cellar tunnel your father showed me on the map. It comes out behind the livery. It hasn't been used in years. It might have collapsed. It's our only chance." Ethan's voice softened. "Clara, you can still change your mind. Stay here. Tell them I forced you to help me. Wilson would back your story." Clara touched the ring in her pocket, drawing strength from its solid presence. Her entire life had been defined by this inn, by safety and routine. For the first time, she was choosing the unknown. "No," she said firmly. "I've made my decision." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll need to move quietly. The tunnel will be dark. We can't risk a lantern until we're well away from town." Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I know this land. My father made sure of that. And I know how to disappear on it," Ethan added. "Together, we have a chance." He extended his hand to her, a simple gesture, yet heavy with meaning. Clara looked at it, understanding that once she took it, her old life would truly be behind her. The ring seemed to warm against her skin as she reached out, her fingers closing around his. Whatever came next, pursuit, danger, uncertainty, they would face it together. Clara Henderson, who had spent her life avoiding risk, was stepping willingly into the greatest risk of all. And somehow, as Ethan's hand closed around hers, it felt not like fear, but like freedom. "Let's go," she whispered. And together they moved toward the tunnel entrance, leaving behind the only home Clara had ever known. The tunnel beneath Henderson's Rest was narrower than Clara remembered from childhood explorations. A low, earthen passage shored up with timber supports that creaked ominously as they moved through darkness. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp soil and thyme. They progressed by feel, their only guide Clara's memory, and the occasional touch of Ethan's hand steadying her when she stumbled. "My father built this during the border disputes," Clara whispered, "when the territorial governor was sending patrols to search for sympathizers. Your father planned for every contingency," Ethan replied, his voice barely audible. After what seemed an eternity of crouched movement, they reached the tunnel's end. A wooden ladder led upward to a trapdoor. Ethan climbed first, pushing gently against the exit. It resisted, then gave way with a shower of dirt and leaves. "Wait," he whispered, disappearing through the opening. Moments later, his face reappeared. Clear, for now. They emerged behind the livery stable, concealed by a thicket of scrub brush that had grown over the tunnel entrance. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in a moonless sky. "We need horses," Ethan said, surveying their surroundings. Clara nodded toward the livery. "Ben Cooper's deaf in one ear and sleeps like the dead. We can leave payment." Inside the darkened stable, Clara moved confidently among the stalls, while Ethan kept watch. She selected 2 sturdy mountain horses, not the fastest, but with the endurance they would need for difficult terrain. "This one's yours," she whispered, indicating a dun gelding. Steady and sure-footed, as they prepared the horses, Clara felt a strange calm descend. Every moment since Ethan's arrival had led to this, leaving behind all she knew for an uncertain future. Yet the decision now made brought its own kind of peace. They worked in whispered collaboration, tightening cinches and securing their meager belongings. Clara left coins wrapped in a note for Ben Cooper, more than the horses were worth, but necessary for her conscience. A noise outside froze them both. Ethan silently drew Clara deeper into the shadows as a figure passed by the stable's side window. Ward, methodically patrolling the area. "They're watching all the exits," Ethan breathed against her ear. Clara's mind raced. "There's another way. Behind the blacksmiths, a cattle trail that connects to the North Ridge. It's overgrown, but passable." As they prepared to move, Clara's hand brushed against her father's rifle in its scabbard on her horse. The weapon had hung over the study fireplace for years, rarely touched since Samuel's death. Now she had taken it down, cleaned it, and loaded it with cartridges from the locked cabinet where her father had kept his ammunition. The Winchester .66 had been Samuel Henderson's constant companion on his journeys through dangerous territory. "Yellow Boy," he'd called it affectionately, for its distinctive brass frame. Clara had never fired it, had never imagined she would need to. Yet now her fingers curled around the smooth wood of the stock, drawing unexpected comfort from its solidity. "You know how to use that?" Ethan asked quietly, noticing her gesture. "My father taught me," Clara replied, "though I've never had cause to. Let's hope that doesn't change tonight." They led the horses silently through the rear door of the livery, pausing in the shadows to scan for movement. The town slept, windows dark except for the saloon down the street and a single lamp burning in the sheriff's office. "Wilson's still awake," Clara murmured. "Keeping watch? Or waiting to see what Beck does?" Ethan replied. "Either way, we move now." They stayed close to buildings, leading the horses with muffled steps until they reached the edge of town. The blacksmith's shop loomed dark against the starlit sky, and beyond it, the narrow trail Clara had mentioned snaked into the underbrush. Just as they reached the trail entrance, a shot cracked the night's silence. Splinters flew from the wooden post beside Clara's head. "Run!" Ethan pushed her forward, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. They mounted hastily, spurring the horses onto the trail as more shots rang out behind them. Clara heard shouting, then the thunder of hooves as their pursuers gave chase. The trail narrowed as it climbed, forcing them to ride single file. Branches whipped past, stinging Clara's face as they raced through the darkness. Her father's rifle bounced against her leg, a constant reminder of what she fought for: justice, truth, the legacy Samuel Henderson had left her. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Beck and Ward were experienced trackers, and the narrow trail left little room for evasion. "They're gaining," Clara called. "There!" Ethan pointed ahead to where the trail forked. Which way? Clara hesitated only a moment. Left, it leads to higher ground. They took the left fork, the horses laboring as the trail steepened. Clara's mount stumbled briefly on loose rocks, nearly unseating her. She clutched the rifle's scabbard for balance, grateful for its sturdy presence. The trail emerged onto a rocky ridge, briefly exposing them against the night sky before plunging back into dense forest. A bullet whined past, close enough that Clara felt its passage. "They've seen us," Ethan said grimly. They drove deeper into the woods, the horses breathing heavily from the exertion. Clara led them through a maze of game trails, hoping to lose their pursuers in the complex terrain she had explored as a child. After an hour of hard riding, they paused in a small clearing to rest the horses. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but both knew it was temporary. Beck and Ward wouldn't give up so easily. "We need to reach the lion shack by dawn," Clara said, checking her father's map by starlight. "From there we can follow the high trail north." Ethan studied her face in the dim light. "You're certain about this? Once we cross the ridge, there's no turning back." Clara's hand moved to the rifle, her fingers tracing the worn initials SH carved into the stock, her father's mark on a weapon that had protected him through countless journeys. Now it would protect his daughter, as she followed a path he might have chosen himself. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied, and knew it to be true. Dawn broke with pale light filtering through pine branches as Clara and Ethan approached the line shack. They'd ridden through the night, pushing themselves and their horses to the limits of endurance, taking advantage of Clara's knowledge of hidden trails to stay ahead of their pursuers. The shack stood in a small clearing, a simple one-room structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. It had been years since Clara had visited, but her father had maintained it faithfully during his lifetime. "Wait," Ethan said as they approached, his voice low. "Something's not right." Clara followed his gaze. The door stood slightly ajar, and fresh hoofprints marked the earth around the cabin. "Someone's been here," she whispered. "Recently." They dismounted at a distance, securing the horses in a concealed thicket. Ethan drew his revolver, while Clara reluctantly removed her father's rifle from its scabbard. They approached the cabin cautiously, moving from tree to tree. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Ethan motioned for Clara to stay back while he circled the structure. Minutes later he returned, his expression grim, empty now, but someone spent the night. Ashes still warm. He glanced at the tracks. 2 horses headed north about an hour ago. Beck and Ward. "Can't be sure, but likely. They must have guessed we'd head here." Ethan studied the surrounding forest. "Which means they know your father's routes." A chill ran through Clara that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How?" someone told them. Ethan's eyes met hers. Someone who knew about this place, about the tunnel. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Few people had known about Samuel's network of safe houses, Mrs. Porter, Sheriff Wilson, perhaps a handful of others her father had trusted. "We need to keep moving," she decided. "If they're ahead of us on the trail, they're setting an ambush," Ethan finished. Inside the cabin, evidence of recent occupation was clear. Disturbed bedding, food scraps, a coffee pot still warm to the touch. As Clara gathered what supplies remained useful, she noticed something on the rough table, a folded piece of paper held down by a small stone. The paper contained a hastily scrawled message. "Morgan, this ends today. Face me like a man or the woman dies too. Beck, he's waiting for us," Clara said, passing the note to Ethan. "On the northern trail." Ethan read it, his jaw tightening. "I should go alone." "You head east to the territorial capital." "No." Clara's voice was firm. "We stay together. There has to be another way north, not according to your father's map. The northern trail is the only passable route from here." Clara paced the small cabin, thinking. "There might be another way." "Not on the map." She moved to the stone fireplace, running her fingers along the rough mortar until she found what she was seeking, a loose stone near the floor. Pulling it free revealed a small hollow containing an oilskin packet. "My father's emergency provisions," she explained. Unwrapping the packet, inside lay a small amount of gold dust. A folded document bearing the territorial governor's seal, and most importantly, a hand-drawn map, far more detailed than the one they carried. "He never showed me this," Clara said, spreading the faded parchment on the table. "It shows every trail, cave, and water source within 50 miles. Ethan studied it intently. "There," he pointed to a thin line running parallel to the main northern trail. "It's marked Hunter's Path, but looks barely passable. Trappers used it years ago." "Difficult but hidden." Clara traced the route with her finger. "It rejoins the main trail here, beyond where they'll be waiting. It's risky. That terrain is treacherous." Clara folded the secret map carefully. "More risky than facing Beck and Ward in an ambush." Ethan conceded with a nod. "We'd need to leave now, travel light." They repacked swiftly, taking only essentials. As Clara returned the loose stone to the fireplace, securing the gold dust and governor's document for some future traveler in need, she felt a profound connection to her father. Samuel Henderson had prepared this refuge, hidden this secret map, created this network of escape routes, all to help those in desperate circumstances. Now his foresight was saving his daughter's life. The Hunter's Path proved as challenging as expected. Barely wider than a game trail in places, it clung to steep mountainsides and crossed tumbling streams on precarious log bridges. The horses struggled with the difficult terrain, forcing Clara and Ethan to dismount and lead them through the worst passages. By midday, they had covered less ground than hoped, but had seen no sign of pursuit. They paused in a small, sheltered hollow to rest the horses and consult the secret map again. "Another 4 hours to the junction with the main trail," Ethan estimated. "If we push hard, we can reach it before dark." Clara nodded, studying the terrain ahead. The path narrowed further as it approached a rocky outcropping. Beyond that, according to the map, lay a steep descent into a narrow canyon before climbing to rejoin the main trail. As they prepared to continue, a distant sound froze them both, the echo of a gunshot from the direction of the main trail, followed by several more in quick succession. "Someone's engaged them," Ethan said, his body tense. "Wilson or Doyle's men? Whoever it is, it won't distract Beck for long." Clara refolded the secret map, tucking it securely inside her jacket. "We need to hurry." They led the horses carefully along the narrowing path, every sense alert for danger. The secret map had saved them from Beck's ambush, but Clara knew their journey was far from over. Ahead lay more difficult terrain, unknown dangers, and eventually a confrontation that couldn't be avoided forever. The document her father had hidden, bearing the governor's seal, weighed on her mind. What was it? Why had Samuel considered it important enough to hide in his emergency cache? Like so much about her father, it represented both mystery and providence, a legacy revealed precisely when needed most. As they navigated the treacherous path, Clara felt an unexpected clarity. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding behind locked doors as darkness fell. Instead, she was facing danger in open air, with the man she had chosen to protect beside. Her and her father's wisdom guiding her way. Twilight was falling when Clara and Ethan finally reached the junction where the Hunter's Path rejoined the main trail. They paused in the shelter of dense pines, surveying the area for any sign of Beck and Ward. "Tracks," Ethan murmured, kneeling to examine the ground. "Multiple horses. Recent." Clara dismounted, her muscles aching from the difficult journey. "Which direction?" "Both." Ethan's expression was grim. "Some heading north, others backtracking south. They've split up to search for us." The distant sound of hoofbeats sent them retreating deeper into the trees. Clara led the way to a small ravine she remembered from childhood expeditions with her father, a place where a fallen log created a natural bridge across a narrow but deep crevasse. As darkness descended completely, they made a cold camp, not daring to risk a fire. Huddled together for warmth, they ate dry provisions from their packs, speaking in whispers. "We should reach the territorial border by tomorrow afternoon," Clara said, consulting the secret map by moonlight. "If we can make it across, Wilcox's influence diminishes." Ethan nodded, though his eyes remained troubled. "And then?" To the governor with what evidence we have. Your testimony, my father's letter to Wilson, the forged ledger if Wilson can provide it. It might not be enough. Clara met his gaze steadily. It has to be. As they prepared to sleep for a few hours before continuing their journey, a twig snapped nearby. Both froze, listening intently. Another crack, closer this time. Ethan drew his revolver, motioning for Clara to stay down. She reached for her father's rifle, heart pounding. A shadowy figure emerged from the trees, hands raised. "Don't shoot," a familiar voice called softly. "It's Wilson." Clara lowered her rifle slightly. "Sheriff?" Wilson stepped into the moonlight, looking haggard and travel-worn. "Been tracking you since dawn. How did you find us?" Ethan asked, his gun still raised. "Followed Beck's men until they split up, then guessed you'd take the old trapper's path." Wilson's mouth quirked slightly. "Your father showed it to me years ago, Clara." Ethan slowly lowered his weapon. "Why are you here?" Wilson reached inside his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope. "This arrived for you yesterday. Special courier from Silver Creek." Clara accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a signed confession from Jeffrey Simmons, Walt's brother. "I, Jeffrey Simmons, do hereby swear that my brother Walter Simmons witnessed the death of Harrison Wilcox on the night of April 17th, 1873. According to Walt's journal, which he entrusted to me before his death, Harrison Wilcox drew a knife on Ethan Morgan during a disputed card game. In the ensuing struggle, Harrison fell upon his own blade. Walt's death the following day was no accident, but murder arranged by Randall Wilcox to silence a witness. I make this statement freely, knowing the danger it brings. The confession was dated, signed and witnessed by the Silver Creek minister. How did this arrive? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Porter's nephew. He wasn't attacked on the road as we thought." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "I misled you. Thought it safer if you believed there was no evidence." "You wanted us to run," Ethan said slowly. "Why?" "Because Randall Wilcox doesn't just own judges. He owns governors, legislators, even territorial marshals." Wilson removed his badge, turning it in his hand. "This confession alone won't stop him. But it might stop Beck and Ward if they knew it existed." Clara studied the confession again. "A copy, the original is safe somewhere." Wilson nodded. "With Judge Hammond in the territorial capital. The one Judge Wilcox doesn't own." A plan began forming in Clara's mind. "Then we don't run. We turn around." "What?" Both men stared at her. "Beck and Ward think we're fleeing north. Instead, we head back to Elkhorn." "That's suicide," Ethan protested. "No." Clara's voice gained confidence. "It's justice. With this confession, Wilson can officially arrest Beck and Ward for conspiracy and attempted murder. We gather everyone in town as witnesses, make it public, so Wilcox can't simply make it disappear." Wilson considered this. "It might work. Beck and Ward are the only immediate threat. With them neutralized and public witnesses to the confession, Wilcox couldn't silence everyone," Clara finished. Ethan still looked doubtful. "It's a massive risk, worth taking," Clara said firmly. "My father died because he stood alone against Randall Wilcox. We won't make the same mistake." As dawn broke, they rode south with renewed purpose, no longer fleeing but deliberately heading toward confrontation. The confession, now safely tucked in Clara's jacket, gave them a weapon more powerful than any firearm. They reached Elkhorn by midday, deliberately riding down the main street in full view. Word spread quickly. Townspeople emerged from shops and homes, staring in amazement at Clara Henderson's return with Ethan Cole and Sheriff Wilson riding beside her. Beck and Ward were waiting at Henderson's Rest, as Clara had anticipated. The bounty hunters stood on the porch, guns drawn, as the three riders approached. "That's far enough," Beck called. "Morgan, you're under arrest for the murder of Harrison Wilcox." Wilson urged his horse forward, his badge now prominently displayed on his chest. "Beck, Ward, you're the ones under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice." A crowd had gathered, murmuring in confusion and anticipation. Mrs. Porter stood at the front. A small, satisfied smile on her face. "On what charge?" Ward demanded. Clara dismounted, the confession in her hand. "We have written testimony from Jeffrey Simmons, confirming his brother witnessed Harrison Wilcox's death. It was self-defense, and Randall Wilcox had Walt Simmons murdered to hide the truth." Beck's cold eyes narrowed. "Convenient story. Where's your proof?" "Right here," Clara replied, holding up the confession. "And the original is already with Judge Hammond in the Capitol." "It's over, Beck." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Then, in a lightning-fast movement, Beck drew his gun toward Clara. A shot rang out, but it was Ethan's bullet that found its mark, striking Beck's shoulder. Wilson's gun trained on Ward, who slowly lowered his weapon. "As I said," Wilson announced for all to hear, "you're under arrest." In the days that followed, Elkhorn buzzed with the story. Telegraph wires carried news of the confession to the territorial capital and beyond. Judge Hammond issued formal papers exonerating Ethan Morgan and calling for an investigation into Randall Wilcox's affairs. 6 weeks later, Clara stood on the porch of Henderson's Rest, watching as a new sign was raised above the entrance. The freshly painted wood gleamed in the sunlight. "Henderson and Cole's Rest." Beside her, Ethan's arm slipped around her waist. "You're sure about the name change?" Clara leaned into his embrace. "My father would approve, I think." "Samuel Henderson was a remarkable man," Ethan agreed. "He saved my life without ever meeting me. Through you, through this place he built, through the daughter he raised." Clara watched as the workmen secured the new sign. The inn that had been her prison after her father's death now represented something different. Not walls to keep danger out, but a haven where truth and justice were honored above all. Sheriff Wilson approached, looking more at peace than Clara had ever seen him. "It's official," he announced. "Randall Wilcox has been indicted on multiple charges. Seems once people started talking, they couldn't stop." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Clara didn't reach for locks or bars. Instead, she stood with Ethan on the porch, watching darkness gather without fear. "Will you play the piano tonight?" he asked softly. Clara smiled. "I think I will. My mother would like that." Together, they turned toward the open door of Henderson and Cole's Rest, where light spilled out to welcome travelers as night fell over Elkhorn.